The information I'm giving you now is about as important as the difference between Advanced Dungeons & Dragons D&D 3.5 and version 5. There's some controversy in the cast iron community about identifying Birmingham Stove Range pans from their Red Mountain series. BS&R produced pans with the Red Mountain label at least from the year 1930 to sometime in the early 1950s. In the early 1950s, they renamed their entire line of cast iron cookware from Red Mountain to Century Cookware. However, they didn't change the actual design of the pans themselves for at least 15 years after the Century series was introduced. All they did was change the name and the label, so pans with this design might have been sold as Red Mountain or Century Cookware pans. Without the label, we simply can't tell. We know this pan is from the early Red Mountain days because of the uneven style of the size number, which suggests it was written by hand on the pattern used to make the casting molds for these pans. After several years of production, or maybe a decade or so, BS&R standardized the size number to this style so it looks more professional, and they produced pans that look like this all the way to the late 1960s. At some point in the early 1950s, the name was changed from Red Mountain to Century Cookware. This pan might have had a Red Mountain label on it, or it could have been sold in a store with a Century label. There's simply no way to tell, but in order to tell the difference between these pans and the pans BS&R produced from the year 1966 through the 1980s, we simply call this a Red Mountain pan. In the year 1966, BS&R upgraded their entire production line and installed automated production equipment. This allowed them to vastly increase their production, and for the next 2.5 decades, they produced an enormous number of pans that looked like this, with an NO and a size number, plus the actual measurement of the pan itself. And after the year 1967, BS&R began producing a Made in USA mark on many of their pans, though not all of them. However, there were a few exceptions to this, and this is where the controversy starts. When BS&R began automated production in 1966, for a few years after this, they continued to produce their largest pans, the number 12 and number 14, with only a size number, in the same manner as the older Red Mountain pans. However, there are a few clues that definitely identify these pans as being made after the year 1966, as we see with this number 14 size skillet. It has a number 14 size number, but it also has a Made in USA mark that clearly identifies it as being made after 1967. There are some clues that suggest that some of these pans were definitely made in the days of Century Cookware after 1966. This number 12 skillet has a rougher surface on the outside and a polished inside, which means it was probably made on the automated production line. It's also interesting to see that this Century Cookware catalog from 1954 does not have a listing at all for a number 12 sized cast iron skillet. This makes it possible that the great majority of all of those number 12 BS&R skillets being listed as Red Mountain are in fact made after 1966 and are actually Century pans. This is why I think this number 12 Dutch oven is actually from the Century Cookware series. However, it's not known if BS&R did the same thing with all of their pans. There have been a few pans found with a large size number, but not a letter identifying the casting mold, which we can see on almost all of the Red Mountain pans. Is this a later Red Mountain or an early Century pan? Collectors of BS&R cast iron have gotten into arguments over this because there really is no definitive answer. Well, at least not yet. Maybe at some point they'll discover production records or some other paperwork that provides a more accurate answer to this question. All I know is I've had this Red Mountain number 8 skillet for 10 years, and it's one of my go-to pans for cooking just about anything. It's got a smooth surface, it's thick and heavy, and it's not warped. Regardless of whether this was produced as a Red Mountain pan or a Century Cookware pan, all I know is I'm going to continue using this pan for the rest of my life, no matter what they call it. Thank you for watching.